Hello, everybody. Welcome to the what would have been the sixth annual, but is actually the fifth annual Ask Anything event here at Ball State University. That's sponsored by the Council of Religious Advisors, which is just a collection of people who lead the religious organizations on campus. And so we meet monthly, and we try to put on at least one event a semester where we get all of our groups together and talk about faith, talk about perspective, and do whatever we can to raise awareness about these organizations on campus. And so this event that we've been doing now for the fifth year is Ask Anything, where we invite students to ask anything. We want to raise religious literacy. We want to raise understanding and tolerance. And so that's part of the reason why we do this event. And for those of you that are joining us, if you look in the chat, there is a website you can go to, which is menti.com. And those numbers there are the numbers that you can text your questions to. And then my colleague Joey will relay those questions so that we can ask the panelists and everybody can learn a little something.
Can I clarify that real quick?
You may.
So go to menti.com and then you'll be asked for a room code. And then during that, the numbers that you see underneath, that is the room code. And so the room code gives you access to put your questions into that space, and then I will receive them. So
okay, great.
Hey, and there's Pastor Andre.
Hey, perfect timing. Let's make sure he's got permission to speak.
Yes.
All right, let's wait a second here and get Pastor Andre in. Pastor Andre, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All right. All right. Welcome. We were just getting started. I was buying time for you.
All right.
I was doing a song and dance routine to make sure you could get here.
I'm going to have to go with my trusty phone. Should be coming in soon. Here we go.
Hey, there he is.
Had a green screen and everything ready for you guys, but that's all. None of that's going to work.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Sorry you had the technical difficulties. Okay. So let's go ahead and I would like to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. So if we could, let's start with Valerie Mayo. Oh, did Joey mute you?
No, I think that was my fault. I muted myself and could not unmute.
Well, that's good to know.
So greetings. My thanks to Robert and Ball State and the Council of Religious Advisors, fellow panelists, and of course, all of you students for this opportunity for you to ask anything, sending greetings on this day from Montgomery, Alabama, by way of Louisville, Kentucky. Presently, I have moved to Louisville as of June 16th of this year. I am serving as the campus minister for Episcopal and Lutheran Ministries at the campus of the University of Louisville. I also pastor a congregation, St. George's in West Louisville, and I am the Episcopal Diocesan Urban Missioner. So greetings to all of you. Looking forward to our time together today.
All right. Thank you, Valerie. And I failed to mention that Valerie and I are colleagues because I'm the Lutheran Episcopal campus minister at Ball State University at Grace Village University. So that's how we know each other. Let's go ahead and pass it on to Richard McKinney.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon everyone, every color, every nation, every religion. I come to you. I'm a former president of the Muncie Islamic Center. Was elected president there. Served a short time and had to pass it on to somebody else due to getting some things done with schooling. My whole mission in life really is to bring peace, understanding, and stopping hatred. That is my genre.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for being with us, Richard. And let's hear from Pastor Andre. Joey, you may need to unmute him if he muted himself. There we go.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm having trouble hearing everyone else, but I'm assuming we're still introducing ourselves. I am Pastor Andre Mitchell from Muncie, Indiana, here close to Ball State, and my church is Deliverance Temple, and I am a third generation pastor. My father's first cousin started it, then handed it to him, and then somehow I got in the mix, and they trusted me to take on the legacy. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you guys.
Thank you, Andre. While we're here with you, the next question was going to be to tell a little bit of your faith background and your story. And you had already started that a little bit about how the ministry had been handed on to you. Anything more that you want to say about what it's like growing up in the church that's been part of the family? He may not be able to hear me.
All right, say that again.
Okay. So you had said that this ministry was started and passed on to your father and handed down to you. One of the next questions we had here was to offer the panelists a chance to share their faith background or their story. What has that been like to grow up as part of that legacy there and always be a part of it?
It's been awesome in some ways, challenging in other ways. Pastoring people who changed your diapers one time is a little different, but it's been amazing. To throw another wrinkle in the plan, I was brought up in a Christian school, and I was the only African American in that school for a long time. Became the first African American male to graduate that school, but it was highly Baptist, fundamental Baptist. My church was highly fundamental Pentecostal. So I went to college that was Quaker. So I'm either confused or well-rounded. I don't know which one quite yet.
I forgot.
But having all those things flowing through me and seeing all those expressions, I think it's made me who I've become today.
Absolutely. Well, and as your friend, I would like to say well-rounded is the word I would use for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Andre. Let's hear from Valerie. Tell us a little bit about your faith background, your faith story.
Sure thing. So by no means has this journey been a straight line. I was raised Baptist. My parents put me on a church bus at the age of 4. I immediately fell in love with Jesus. Throughout that time, my father, he passed at the age of 12, and then we separated from the church of his upbringing, which was Baptist. And somehow my mother, wanted to join a community with friends. So she joined the Episcopal Church with many of the educators where we were. I was hanging out with my friends, and so I spent time Pentecostal church, AME church. I journeyed later and went to Duke Divinity School, which was Methodist, and I went to, unbeknownst to me at the time, it didn't really register with me that I went to an Episcopal HBCU. And then the priest there later invited me to come back after receiving an undergraduate degree in religion and philosophy and a master's degree in theological studies to teach to his congregation. And I just fell in love with it. And then that beautiful congregation sent me back to seminary. God is calling me back. So then I went to Virginia Theological Seminary, which is Episcopal, and I stand on the other side of that. So it's been a windy road. And I have definitely had my Jonah moments where I've been running 15 years, if not more, of that journey to finally submit to the will of God. And here is where I now sit.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Valerie. Richard, tell us a little bit about your faith background and story.
Okay, I will make this as short as I can. Of course, for those who don't know, I am a Muslim. I have been a Muslim now for over 10 years. I came to Muslim, I guess the best way to, or I came to Islam, I guess the best way to say it is through the back door. I was a veteran. I am a veteran, I guess. I was in the military. I was spent 25 years in 2 different branches of service. was medically retired and was full of hate and rage. And I directed that completely towards Muslims and Islam, to the point to where I had a plan to blow up the Muncie Islamic Center. You know, when I had listening to Christians my whole life growing up, and you know, there was a saying that God works in mysterious ways. Boy, does he. Because of things that were going on and things that, you know, just were happening at the time. Again, I'm shortening this story. I decided to take a venture into that Islamic Center, meet with the people, and to make sure that what I was doing was the right thing. Or actually, I was there to gain evidence that what I was doing was the right thing. But it totally changed on me. They handed me a Quran, said, read it, come back when you have questions. And I did. And it hit me. It hit me that this was my path now. And it changed everything.
Mm.
That's
All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
yes.
So as many of you know, we don't always have a focus for this Ask Anything event. And this year we did decide to have the focus that we tried to have last year, which it has remained a very relevant topic, especially in our country. But this idea of focusing on talking about issues around race and religion. And one question I would like to ask, let's talk about some difficult things here first. I'd like to talk about what prejudices have you experienced in your faith tradition? And that's anybody who ever would like to go first there.
I guess I'll jump in then. Islam encompasses so many different races and nationalities, as does Christianity. But with us, it you know, everybody knows about the Shia and the Sunnis not agreeing and not getting along and all the atrocities that have happened out of that. That's not really a race thing. That's more of a religious theology thing, almost like the old Catholic and Protestant problems that we
Yeah.
had. Okay. With us, the big issue is necessarily language, because so many people live so close together and they speak so many different languages that things through interpretations are mistaken. They're misunderstood, and it causes a lot of conflict. There has been people, you know, that have said that, you know, or basically have the attitude that, you know, my Islam's better because it comes from Saudi, or my Islam's better because it comes from Afghanistan, or, you know, and of course, those are total lies. They're not any better. And matter of fact, by them making that statement makes it worse. Uh, and that's not Islam as a whole. Those are pockets, you know, as I think we can understand the whole terrorist thing. That's a pocket of a small entity within the religion. Now, I've made this statement several times, and with all the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they're all beautiful. They all have purpose and meaning. The problem came about is when they started involving human beings, because human beings took it for themselves and just ran awry with it. And so now we have all these conflicts and misunderstanding and ignorance. Ignorance with each other, ignorance with each other. You know, I've made the statement about how it boggles my mind that when I go to speak, that there are people that really, they just want others, let's say white Christian America, to not hate us. That's the biggest thing. They just don't want to be hated, you know, for them being a Muslim. And in saying that, in turn, they have been or have had a discord with other Muslims. So my statement to them is, how can you expect somebody to get along with you when you guys can't even get along with yourselves? And again, I say this, that's not an Islamic problem. That goes, why I've known that to be in the Christian churches, denominations. The reason why do we have different denominations? Because people disagree. That's
Right.
why.
Right.
So, and sometimes those disagreements become very aggressive and very mean and very spiteful, and people get hurt. So in a lot of ways, we're really no different than the other religions when it comes to that. We have people that don't want to live alongside someone they disagree with. The religion of Islam is beautiful. It's great, but not all the people who are Muslims are the same, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And we find that in any religious, political,
Absolutely.
philosophical system. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Thank you, Richard. Valerie or Andre, any response to that, where you have encountered prejudice in your faith tradition?
Sure. So where I presently am, and where I am in the process towards the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. Some of you may be familiar historically, and even presently, it's 90% white denomination, right? And as an African American woman, I entered this process initially in Southern Virginia. And that is, where I'm from. And for whatever reason, I was denied entry to continue in the process in Southern Virginia. 2 years later, it was shared with me that there were 3 other Black women who were also denied the opportunity to explore the ordination process in that particular geographic region. Who knows why? So, and then you add on to that I am a single mother, never been married. I have 2 children, an 18-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And whatever implicit or explicit biases that have been placed on my person, even removed from church community, just in human community, but that does trickle into, our faith traditions and practices. So I am grateful. God is intentional. And I think as long as we remain faithful, I assure you, never did I see myself going and journeying to Louisville, Kentucky. But when called, I resounded with the yes. And so for such a time as this, the path had been made and laid. And, I now am very fortunate to be part of Dismantling Racism discussions as a trainer within the diocese on the Episcopal side in the national church. I've been very fortunate to work with the Sacred Ground curriculum by Katrina Brown, working hand in hand with her, just to establish a multiracial, undertaking with circles. For those who are unfamiliar, the Sacred Ground curriculum is intentionally set for white circles and white people to do the work of racial healing amongst themselves, but to be in a pilot group where it has been multi-ethnic. I celebrate that in the sharing of those stories. And God has just opened up, in spite of those prejudices, right? So many opportunities for us to journey in this powerful work together. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Andre.
Yes, I would. First of all, racism is as American as apple pie. And so there's just a myriad of things. You don't have to have a connected to faith for it to be, but I think it's more disheartening when it is connected to your faith, especially a faith that's supposed to be about love, forgiveness, acceptance. So I'll start with my senior year in high school, where we were, it was a very evangelical based type of school. And so they didn't believe in people going to proms and dances. So they created their own prom where we weren't going to be doing any dancing, but you could take someone. So this particular year, my senior year, it fell on the same time that other schools had their proms. So a lot of the Black girls in my church were not going to be able to go with me. Any people in my neighborhood were not going to be able to go with me. So I just posed a question. I was like, is there an issue with me bringing a white girl to the prom? And they said that they will get back with me. And I was pulled to the side and basically told that it was frowned upon. Now, this is not 1962. I know I may look old, but I graduated in 1994. And, you know, at that time, I didn't really think about it until I got older about how racist and Christianity went hand in hand in some ways, because the bottom line is what they were saying is that I wasn't good enough to bring a white girl to school. I'm good enough for them to take my parents' money for the private school, but I'm not good enough to take any of their white girls to school. So that's just one example. There's too many examples of that, but it's I think it has a lot to do with our love for nationalism in this country, that more people are connected to America than they are actually the Bible. And so that's why racism is able to be perpetuated in the Christian faith in this country.
I'm glad you bring that up. That was actually going to be one of my next questions was, from each of your perspectives, do you see race problems in your traditions to be problems unique to your tradition or problems unique to the social identity of where you live or have lived? And it can be both and. So I mean you were off to a good start there, Andre. If you want to add to that at all, or if you think you've said enough on that.
Yeah, I'll kind of keep going. I think when you look at how this country came into being, I think many of the trappings that we have when it deals with racism is just embedded in who we are as a nation. And so when people are trying to seek faith and seek God from a context that views the American flag on the same level as the Bible, so the sacred writings, and then also the things that are in our culture are viewed as to be honored, but our scripture doesn't really teach us that. So I think it has a lot to do with where we are, our context, different places. You see different things. The Bible Belt, people in the Bible Belt will have a totally different experience than other people in what they would call liberal America. So it does have a lot to do with where we are. And I see a lot of change in certain areas, but to me, it's just a hard nut to crack because it's so embedded into the culture of who we are that if you don't look a certain way, if you don't dress a certain way, if you don't have a certain economic status, you are an outsider. No matter what the Bible says about the Good Samaritan, that becomes secondary to just the way we've been raised and our silos that we get ourselves into. So tearing that down is problematic because many times when you tear that down, people think you're tearing down their faith. When you're not tearing down their faith, you're really trying to expose their faith.
Yeah. No, that's good. Valerie or Richard, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in on that. And really, oh my gosh, Pastor Andre, I mean, you hit it on the head. And really, what it comes down to is there's always been a saying, God and country, right? God and country. But in the context of America, it needs to be looked at almost like God or country, because if you do both, you're taking away from the other one. I submitted a poem a few months ago on Facebook that just jumped into my mind, and it was titled "Only If You Look Like Me." And I quoted things like, a line in the national anthem, which, home of the free, land of the brave, or land of the free, home of the brave, right? And I quoted that, and then I answered it with, but only if you look like me. And that's so true. We see that every day in the news. We see that no matter where we turn to. Our religious faith, regardless of whether it be Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, will take us away from that. It will rise us or raise us from that. I do know how to talk. Yeah. It will raise us from that. But we rely so much on this. I'm an American. I'm an American. And that's one thing that I I know Islam is deeply against, is the whole national thing, because we have a term called ummah, which is basically nation, one nation, and that is supposed to encompass the whole Islamic world. Does it? No, it doesn't. Should it? It's supposed to. And Christianity and Judaism have that also. Maybe not as specific as Islam, but they do have it. We're together in this. We're together in this fight of hatred and racism. I grew up in a black neighborhood. I was actually part of desegregation back in the early 70s. I was the only white kid on my school bus, but it's because of where I lived. And I just thought that was, I didn't really understand it for what it was until I got older. But to me, that's just crazy. I can't conceive that now that I'm an adult. And I never was racist, but I was a nationalist, and I did not care for foreigners being in my country, which, it's not mine. And the way things are, you can have it. but our leaders have done this to us, and I'm not pointing anybody in particular out because they're all guilty of it. They've done it to us. Society's done it to us, but we've allowed it. We've allowed it because we have moved away from the tenets of our religion, regardless of what that religion is. Because I know Christianity. I grew up in a Christian environment, I guess, per se. I would never call myself a Christian because of the way I acted before I became a Muslim. But I knew Christianity. And I know Christianity does not profess the actions that people take in this country, namely white America. So.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Valerie, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So, in terms of matters of race and faith, as an Episcopalian, so for those who are unfamiliar, part of the Anglican Communion, tracing, our lineage back to the Church of England, which had responsibility with the acquisition of the land from indigenous peoples and profited from the transatlantic slave trade and domestic slave trade. For those who, I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, on vacation, and I said, well, where do I want to go on vacation? I would love to be at the beach, but Louisville is pretty far from the beach, so let me try my hand at going to Montgomery. And, so I spent the day today at the Legacy Museum, Brian Stevenson's initiative. And, just looking at the history, we have a governor from Mississippi, 1857, who shared, as Christian people, it is our duty, it is the duty of the South to keep them, enslaved bodies, in the present position at any cost and at every peril, right? So when we're speaking of faith and race and tradition and, within this American context, it's divorced from the truth of what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And it has been a false narrative that's been perpetuated, where one body of people is superior to another. And, I think that there is an inherent evil when those discussions are not had. I celebrate being able to talk about what it means to be a disciple of Christ, to be Christ-like, as Pastor Andre said, to be rooted in love, right? And forgiveness and peace and mercy and justice. but to have a distorted narrative rendered by a dominant culture, and for that to not be interrogated in terms of society and faith and what it means to be a human body, what it means to be created, what it means to be dependent and subject to a supreme being, which is our creator. So I think that, you know, leaning into conversations such as this to start to strip away the mistruths and the distortions that have occurred within our tradition will help us. And, you know, in the Episcopal Church, we take Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, becoming a beloved community, and that this is our time to be transformed to that what God created us to be, which is, you know, one body, one human collective, and one human family. So, but it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Mhm.
That it is. All right. Thank you all. We've been on a roll here because we've been just segueing into segue. I want to pass it over to Joey. Joey, have we had any questions come in?
We have not. So again, if you are confused on how to do the questions, or maybe there just aren't any, maybe our panelists have done a fantastic job of answering any and all questions. But if you go to menti.com on your browser, it could be a computer, could be a phone, enter into the room chat and enter the number that's here on the chat. I will post it one more time in case newcomers don't have access to that. And you can submit your questions there. But so far, we do not have questions. I think maybe an alternative, if for some reason that's not working, you can select in the chat box to only send a question to me. So my name is Joey Kuntz. So if you need to send a question that way, that could be permissible.
All right. Joey, we didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, I'm Joey. I'm a campus pastor here at Ball State University with Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship. So I've been doing that for since 2014. So however many years that is, directing for 2 years, but being on staff since 2014.
Very good. Thank you, Joey. All right. Well, I'm glad I came up with some early questions to keep things going in case no other ones rolled in. So let's go a little deeper. You know, there's this idea, and this was posed to me by a friend of mine, and I really have taken some time to think about it. But you know, this is going to look a little different for our Christian panelists and our Muslim panelists. But you know, Christianity has been called at times the white man's religion, and that it has been forced upon people of color. And then Richard, for you to think about as well, you know, there's this big view that Islam is primarily an Arab religion, and that it's exclusive and hasn't been very inclusive. And so yeah, I mean, just some baggage that comes along with those sorts of ideas that are out there, and that are propagated by big thinkers. You know, I mean, these aren't small things. And so if anybody wants to take a stab at responding to that, please feel free.
Yeah, I can jump on that. It's funny because I can see where people would get the concept of Christianity being a white religion, and I say that because a question that was posed to me when it was first made public that I had become a Muslim was why are you taking on some kind of foreign religion? And again, getting back to, you know, it's an Arab thing, when really that's actually not the biggest population of Islam are not Arabs. They're Indonesians and Malaysians and, you know, Southeast Asian people, right? But what my answer to them is that, well, if you want to be truthful, all religions are foreign, except maybe Scientology. You know,
that's alien.
Yeah. I don't even know. I don't know much about it, so I don't want to talk about it. But but they all come and when I say all, I have to explain myself. I'm talking about the Abrahamic religions, as I refer to them, the big three, and they all come from Judaism. Originally, it was just a continuation of that faith, and they became different doctrines, different theologies, and different practices. And in saying that, so it all came from the region of the Middle East or the Mediterranean area. All the religions did. If we've taken something and made it a white religion or made it an American religion even, then we've changed it. That's not right. Because it's not made to be changed. It wasn't made to be changed. It was made to be comprehended. And I agree. Times change, things change, our sciences change, and so I know a lot of people get offended, especially in Islam, when you bring up the word change, which has been something that is just very hard to accept. And it's not that they change; they adapt, and it's like they grow up. Because certain things, and let's use the Constitution as an example for that. There's things in the Constitution that absolutely, word for word, do not apply to today and times. But we have built from that to add things to it. I'm not saying we should add anything to our prospective religions, but we have to be able to translate that into what is going on at the moment. And that's where us investigating and learning for ourselves and not necessarily relying on the word of just a pastor or just an imam or, which is, we go back in history, we look at the Middle Ages, and I put the church in quotations because there was only one church in Europe at the time. And it was, which had become Catholicism, known today. But it started out where nobody could read. Nobody could read except for the people of the church and some of the royals. Not even all of them could read. So you have this Bible, and the pastor is telling you what it says. And as we know through history, not all of those guys were on the up and up. Same thing in Islam. A huge population within our religion today cannot read. They're told what it says. And I could come up with examples of things I actually know of and have witnessed myself where that had actually come to where people have been hurt. So, but that's for later if that comes up. But that's just where I stand on that. So.
Sure. Thank you. Valerie or Andre, would you like to respond to that?
I think Pastor Andre is muted. But yeah, so in terms of Christianity being the white man's religion, so I was, I think, the only African-American child in my Baptist church that my parents put me on the bus and sent me on. And from the age of 4 probably to 8, I slept with a plaque of my Jesus, and he was blonde and blue-eyed, and I loved him dearly. But as I started to grow, and even as a child, I'd read Hebrew scripture, all the stories, right? Dare to be a Daniel, and Noah, and all of these, stories of these heroes and heroines in the Hebrew Testament. And some things just weren't sitting right with me. So, the way that Jesus was being fed to me just didn't sit right. Even, Jesus loves all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. We are all precious in his sight. And yet something just seemed to be off. And so, I could have conceded to that thought, well, this was the white man's religion put on persons of color. I could have conceded to that and, just went along with it. But instead, it caused me to interrogate the question And that's how, I wound up at Duke Divinity School. That was a personal journey. That was not for vocation. That was self-exploration to try to understand what this is that we're doing as humans in relationship to a creator. And it was there that I had an adult conversion moment, and I fell in love with Jesus again, with, just understanding the nature of the relationship. So when you start to strip back that which has been sprinkled on it, all those, as I said, distorted narratives and mistruths, and you go back to the root of who Jesus is. Jesus is God who is walking amongst us. Jesus is the God who loved us so much that entered into this created world to suffer with us, to teach, to educate, and to be fully human and fully divine. At the same time, it cannot be true that this would be any type of racialized undertaking for a creator that created all of us as God's beloved children, and for us to share this created world, and for us to be stewards of this created world, and for us to love one another, to love our world, and no, absolutely not. It's impossible to love God with your whole heart and to love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor doesn't necessarily have your same complexion, and yet that love abounds, right? So it was in that process of finding Jesus again and reclaiming Jesus, as Bishop Michael Curry says, I could no longer be tempted to fall into that mythology of Christianity.
I've heard that a lot, especially from young African Americans, a lot of African American males who have been rejecting Christianity, and that's one of the things that say it's a white man's religion. But to me, it's a lazy argument. We don't do the same thing with cars. Just because there are car accidents, then, oh my God, all cars are bad, and cars can't be used because we have people who use cars wrong. We don't do that with food. Just because some people had a food addiction, became obese or bulimic, we don't get rid of all food. But because certain people handled Christianity or the Bible wrong, now we throw it all out. And one of the things that irritates me is it's derogatory to our ancestors to say that after our ancestors were beat, whipped, raped, stripped apart, that they said, yeah, you know what? I want that same Jesus that you guys have been talking about. That's the one I want. I want the same Jesus of the people that are beating me. But when you strip it away and you realize that they had what they called a slave Bible, where they actually pulled out pieces of the Bible to make a religion that wasn't real. But what I believe is people found the true Jesus outside of that, and they were like, you know what? And just me thinking, I'm thinking of people who were beat on Monday and somehow were supernaturally healed on Tuesday, and they knew that didn't have anything to do with this Jesus that my slave master's talking about, but there's something real that I'm feeling that is touching me. And they came out of that with Negro spirituals. They came out of that building great churches. They came out of that with one of the great churches that were built with sharecropper money. So I just think as young people now, we've just become, it's just easy because the gospel does require some sacrifice. And so instead of making those sacrifices, like no longer committing adultery or not having sex before marriage and all kinds of things that the gospel restricts us in. Once we get to those restrictions, the easiest thing is to say, oh, that's a white man's religion. When the truth is, I don't want to sacrifice anything. So it's not like colonization. The Bible has tried to be colonized, but the true essence of the scripture has always outlasted whatever was trying to be done to it. So it doesn't belong to any particular group of people. It doesn't belong to any country. It belongs to those who would believe it by faith. And I would assume, I have no understanding, but I would assume Islam is the same way, that it's those who believe in it. It doesn't belong to a certain group of people. And humans like to take credit for things that aren't theirs. People do it all the time. Columbus, who was just celebrated, he was very good at that, taking credit for things that's not there. But that doesn't change the fact of America was there just because Columbus said he founded it. So we don't take what someone done to something and then throw out everything. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Good. All good responses. Thank you all for that.
Can I add something to that though? I appreciate Pastor Andre for mentioning Islam, because yes, you're absolutely right. We do believe that that it is for everybody. It's and if you walk into a mosque on Friday during prayer time pre-COVID, you will see there's every color in the rainbow sitting there on the floor. Every color, every class, everybody's right there. So, but in the Quran, it says specifically that the translation is that we were created by one man, one woman, and made into different tribes, different nations, in order so that we may be able to learn from each other. Now, we're all guilty of not adhering to this. I don't care what your faith is. We're all guilty of not adhering to this. But I think, my Christian panelists can believe that verse has validity, regardless, even though it's Islamic, it has validity. That's why we were made into different people. We're supposed to work together. So.
Yeah. Well,
we have a couple questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, guess what, y'all? We had some questions come in, and being mindful of time, but we're getting a little tight on time, so we want to address these questions here so that we can retain the spirit of Ask Anything. So, Joey, if you want to lay those on them.
I'll ask this first one because it's kind of a big one, and then we'll see if we have time for the second question. But I thought the first question was really good. It seems like it's primarily aimed towards the Christian panelists, but I'm sure that Mr. McKinney, you probably have a response for this as well. But though segregation has legally ended, there are still white and black churches. What could we do as Americans, as people of faith, to begin to make steps towards unification? And then their follow-up question to that was, or should there be unification in those churches, or should they remain separated?
I'll try to tackle that briefly. I think it does go deeper than just segregation, because even though segregation is ended, if you look at things like redlining, even gentrification, people still live in certain areas collectively, because not everybody can always go where their money will take them because of the way our economics are laid out. So oftentimes you do have many African Americans living in the same area, and there's a lot of church offerings there. But one thing that I have noticed, and I would say that this needs to be laid at the feet of white Christians in America, is the fact that most Blacks they don't have an issue going to a white church and being under white leadership. Even our panelist, Valerie, was sent by her parents to a church that was fully white, because that's our context as minority. We're used to being the minority. We're used to plugging in, may not being the only person. That is just normal to us. Normally, when people tell me, when people find out I'm a pastor and they like me, they say, you know what, I want to come to your church. The second question is, will I be the only white person at your church? Am I going to be the only one? So those in the majority, they have an issue being the minority because they're not used to it. So in order for there to be sometime integration in those areas, people have to be willing to come on a side of town that you're not used to coming to, a side of town that doesn't have grocery stores, that doesn't have malls. Because of the way our economic system is set up, many times our churches are in areas like that, and you have to be willing to cross the tracks. And so I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that things are not integrated on Sunday morning. I think Malcolm X is the first one to say that the most segregated time is Sunday morning. And until our economic status change, until people see the need of going out of their comfort zones and their silos and entering other places, I don't think it will change. And I still think that in our country, it would take those in the majority making that first step. And often I'll say this, and so I can kick it on to someone else, but most of the times the multicultural churches are led by white pastors because Blacks are used to humbling under white authority versus whites being used to humbling under Black authority. In Muncie, we do have a exception to the rule. Destiny Christian Center is about 60-40 white and Black, and there is a Black pastor, but that's not the norm across America. So it will take some hard conversations and some work to get that to change.
Thank you, Pastor Andre. I celebrate that. So for those who are not familiar with the demographics in Louisville, Kentucky, 1% of the African-American bodies in the state of Kentucky live in West Louisville. And there is a line, 9th Street, in that the line of demarcation. And I have colleagues who have never crossed 9th Street. As I said, I pastor a church on 26th Street. I think that I will celebrate and share that the Diocese of Kentucky has been very intentional with even my appointment as the urban missioner. They have an urban partnership, which has 4 core churches in the heart of Louisville. It's a coalition of 8. But the 4 core, one is Christ Church Cathedral, which is a white congregation. And then you have the sister to that, which is the Church of Our Merciful Savior. That's where descendants of the African diaspora were sent because they weren't permitted to come to the cathedral once upon a time. You have the church where I pastor, which was historically a white church, but after white flight happened, it is now predominantly African-American. We do have 4 white members. And then the 4th church is Calvary, which is around the corner from the cathedral. So one of the things that we have been doing intentionally in my role is we do sharing of sacred spaces. So we do pulpit swaps in this virtual space. God has opened up an opportunity for us to bless one another in community by joining Christian education forums that any of us are hosting. So that's breaking boundary lines. The things that we had hoped to do physically crossing the line, we can now do virtually. So that's one of the things that is intentional. One of the things I would also name though is in Southern Virginia, we did have, I was the member of the all-white church, and right up the street, 3 miles away was the Black Episcopal Church. And it took about 3 years. We wanted to join these forces to worship together. Year 1 was every 5th Sunday. They would rotate. 3 miles away, guys. They would rotate. Then year 2, it was every last Sunday of the month. They would rotate. I was teaching, the Christian education, also known as Bible study, which was open to both groups. And then year 4, year 3 rather, we were hoping to do something different. The issue was expressed with the Black congregation, the concerns and the fear of loss of power in the liturgy, in the worship, in the service. Because unfortunately it was a financial divide. So our white members were all ready to go with blending worship services. But we had to try to reconcile at what cost, because once there's a power differential there, the familiar songs to one congregation may no longer be sung in worship, and trying to kind of find that middle ground to share those experiences. Unfortunately, I was not there for year 4. And just, I think because of lack of human agency and human power, the congregations today remain split. The other thing that I would share is that growing up in a Black church, one of the things that I personally experienced was the difference in what is shared by the preacher in the pulpit. So Black church, it's about, everything social and political, and what is happening and how it's impacting the community. And yet I've been inside of white spaces that don't mention anything political, which is quite interesting to me because Jesus was a revolutionary, you know, and to not name that inside of worship space, I think kind of misses his teachings and what he was trying to do with flipping the world on its head in a revolutionary spirit. So, you know, just looking at that, so to look at the question, is unification possible? Most certainly. I just, before moving to Louisville, I served at a incredibly multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-generational congregation, one of few that I have seen in the Episcopal Church, and it has been led for the last 19 years by an African-American female. I'm so grateful to the very Reverend Kim Coleman for being my mentor. So it definitely is possible, but just really paying attention to those dynamics of what those power shifts may be and sensitivities, and you know, looking around in your congregation to see who is not being counted as you are putting together worship or liturgy or community education forums, all things related to ministry, to make sure that all bodies are being represented with equity.
Let me throw one other thing out there, and I think it is a little hurtful to know that many congregations have flown over us proverbially to go to Africa and help people in Africa, but they wouldn't go a few blocks to their colleague. And so sometimes it's the feeling that as long as I'm looking down to you to help you, I'll do life with you, I'll engage you. But if I have to deal with you as my equal, then it's like, I don't know if I need to do that. And that's probably not the whole of it, but sometimes that's how it feels. And so we have to work through those kind of things to really have true integration. And it does have to be intentional, like Ms. Valerie's saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that was a big question, but that was good conversation, and I'm glad that question was asked. Being mindful of everyone's time, we're about to hit 8:05. We said we were going to keep this till about 8. If the panelists want to engage this last question and people want to stick around, but panelists, if you need to get going, by all means, let us know. But if you want to answer one last one, let's just go for it and knock it out, and that way we got folks answered here. So all right, Joey, fire away.
Yep. So I have no other questions on the board. So I'll say that this is our concluding question, or I guess that's your job, but that's the last question I have. What has been the response for those in your faith tradition as you've publicly engaged in race discussions more recently?
Well, the people that I went to school with, I still see them on Facebook, and some of them have labeled me a race baiter. So it's just a difference of opinion, and I made a quick analogy just recently that said if animals were talking and fish in a fish tank were talking about there's algae in this fish tank, and then there's a dog in the house saying, hey, I don't see any algae. The issue is that the dog isn't in the fish tank. They don't see it from the perspective of the fish. They can only see it from the perspective of the dog. So as I talk about race, I sometimes realize that people may not see it. I have friends that say they don't see systemic racism, but they're not in the fish tank with me. So even though the gospel is bigger than just race, there are times that I need to talk about it, and I do it unashamedly, because the people who get it, the people who don't, and the people who want to will try to understand.
I celebrate that. So thank you, Pastor Andre. So recently in a Sacred Ground conversation, once again, this is intended for white people to do the work amongst themselves on, these race discussions. And it was eye-opening to me. We had a gentleman, I believe his name was David Camden. He was leading this seminar, and he was sharing that much of the division is between white people, right? So we have the extremists that we said that don't believe that there is a race issue, and then we have those who just might not be as aware or conscious, and then you have those who are, saying, yes, there's an issue and we have work to do, right? But it's not necessarily us persons of color, because we step out of our door and we're hit with it every day. So it's I think in terms of the response and speaking publicly, I think there are so many people who are celebrating that we are taking, removing the scales from our eyes, right? And no longer looking at this world with these rose-colored lenses, as Pastor Andre said, and seeing, other people's experiences of what it means to be human, just to be human in this world, and, starting to really do the work. And to know, one of the things, that it strikes me that American history and government were required, had to have them to graduate, right? But African-American history or indigenous history or, name the other histories, they've always been electives, right? So if we start to reframe our thinking that those are also required text and it's sacred history that we need to know, and we start doing our own work, and being intentional. I traveled 7 hours to Montgomery, Alabama, because I wanted to go to the Legacy Museum. Modeling that in community, maybe, not that journey, but picking up a book, right? And learning and sharing, but it is inviting those who are in the dominant culture to feel more comfortable. I've also experienced those who have wanted to be a part of a Sacred Ground circle, but have kind of been ashamed to explore. And one of the things we're doing is we're blessing our white brothers and sisters, come on this journey. There's Mickey Scott Bay has an invitation to Brave Space. Come on and get inside of this brave creative space to explore what it means to be human with one another. So I would say my experience is that it's being celebrated. And people genuinely want to know more. And then there are going to be those who are on the periphery who just are not there yet. And in the words of our dear brother David, he said, those might not be the folk you need to talk to right now. Sure, invite them into the conversation at some point, but maybe those who are closer to your own leanings. My eyes have been open just being in conversation and hearing the shared stories that, one of my white sisters was 35 before she really was hit in the face with race. And that was when she was purchasing a home that the original deed said, no Negroes, no Asians, and no Jews. And that was the first recognition. And my life, no, it's not 35 years. I've not been able to journey 35 years without a level of awareness. And that's not the truth that I can teach my children. So let's not make it an elective anymore to learn about each other in community.
Powerful.
Yes, definitely. Is it my turn?
You're the big close here, so bring it strong.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Bring it strong. Yeah, it's and it like the pastor said, talk about being people going to other nations to help out, maybe where their roots were and everything like that, and that's admirable. I won't discount that at all, because people need help. People should be helped. Plain and simple. It's that easy. But I have a doctrine that I've used in the past, and it's you have to fix the house before you can fix the yard. If that's relatable, if anybody can understand that a little bit better. The house needs to be strong before we can worry about beefing up this yard. Because, it's the same as, you know, if you don't have a strong foundation, then everything's going to crumble on you. It doesn't matter how much you put into this or how much you put into that. You got to do this first. In saying that, you know, we are all human beings. The time I spent in the military, you know, I've been on every continent except Antarctica, and I've served next to all different races, nationalities, even. And one thing that I've learned out of all of that is that every one of us had red blood. Every one of us. You cannot take that away. It's the common denominator. We're all human. We're all humankind. The thing is you need to be both human and kind. Otherwise, why are you here? Why are you, you know, it's really hard for me to explain in any other way, but humankind, be both. Be both. Racism exists. I don't know. I guess it's a pursuit that somebody along the lines has to feel like they're superior, when in fact we're not superior to anybody. You know, the Quran also says there's no white over black, there's no Arab over non-Arab. It says that, and so that tells us right there that we're no better than the person next to us. You know, I have a lot of problems dealing with the fact that it's my race created these problems. My race did that. Now, what do I do about it? People have said, well, you know, this is not a white problem. People have told me that this is a black problem. You don't really need to get involved with that. I was like, excuse me? I said, this is not a black problem. This is not a white problem. This is an everybody problem. And everybody needs to make a stand. Everywhere, at every moment. I hate to see these things get violent like they have in the past. But you know what? Again, human beings, a lot of time that's their nature. And we have two extreme groups. We have an extreme on the right, we have an extreme on the left. Now, if we just step back and let them have at each other, things might be a little bit better. I don't know. But we're caught in the middle because we don't want violence. We want to get a message across, and that message is being lost by these people. You know, a Christian pastor once told me that when you have fundamentalist ideals, especially within religion, problem is you take the fun out of it and make it mental. And religion was supposed to be something that was used to rejoice, was used to praise. Those are verbs, man. Those are verbs. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be action. Because we are people of faith, we don't need to be sitting on the sidelines. We need to be in the forefront, regardless of what our color is. You know, I end all my talks with a final line, and I'll do that here. And that's, I can, you will, because we must.
Great closer. Great closer. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Pastor Andre. Thank you, Joey, for setting up this digital platform, and thank all of you for coming out. This has been another great Ask Anything event, and we couldn't do it without everybody coming out and showing up. And so, thank you for this.
Thank you too, Robert.
Yes.
Glad to have the conversation. Glad for your perspectives, and on a topic that's not a simple topic. And so I recognize that, and I recognize the mental labor that goes into this and the spiritual labor. So thank you all for being willing to step into the space and to be vulnerable and to answer these questions so that we can all continue to journey through this together and lift one another up. So truly, thank you for that. So we'll go ahead and end the recording now, and whoever needs to check out can check out. So again, thank you all. Go in peace, and we'll see you on down the road.
Thank you. Thank you.